It's why I love what I do. Transitioning from this earthbound thing, and now all of a sudden you're just floating. Just some magic of physics and low pressure is holding you in the air. And the magic of it is it's just with slight pressures with the control yoke. It's half a football field in length. Some people say you're not flying a plane. It's not a plane, it's a place.
A pilot shares what it's like flying a C-141 Starlifter, one of the biggest military aircraft in the world, and how fun and nerve-wracking it can be. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Kevin McDermott, the author of today's story, Cliff Richards and the Shadows Save the Day Again, is a career pilot. In the Air Force, he flew gigantic supply aircraft, and today, Kevin pilots commercial airliners. His story is a charming look at his love of flying, even when it turns his knuckles white. Let's listen to Cliff Richards and the Shadows Save the Day Again, performed by David Watkins. Then I'll talk with author and pilot Kevin McDermott.
The pained look on Rich's face expressed my sentiments exactly. An airman manning Hill Air Force Base flight planning area had just told us Command Post wanted me on the phone. Rich, my co-pilot, and I were finishing the paperwork for our 12-hour flight. 12 hours is well beyond our cargo plane's range, so we plan to take on 80,000 pounds of fuel from a Bangor Air Force Base air refueling tanker. All the planning and coordinating took time and effort. I was hoping Command Post's call wasn't a sign we'd missed something. Rarely do unexpected conversations with Command Post officers end well for the crew. Being summoned could mean anything from a miserable reassignment to answering for a screw-up or some desk jockey complaining we were asking for too much fuel. Rich followed me to the counter. He stayed close to watch my expression and glean whatever he could from my end of the conversation. "This is Captain McDermott." "Good morning, Captain. I'm Major Blake. I just wanted to let you know we're here if you need anything. This is a high-priority deployment. A lot of leadership will be monitoring it." "Thanks, sir. I think we're good. We'll just need a van in 5 minutes to get us to our plane." "A van is waiting outside. Fly safe. Call if you need anything." "Thanks again, sir." Rich could see by my demeanor we were in clear before I hung up, but he was still curious. I confirmed his assessment by saying he was just asking if we need anything. He also felt compelled to remind me this is a 1B1 mission. Rich replied, "I filed the flight plan. I think we're ready. Maybe if they stop helping us for 5 minutes, we can get this mission off on time." "Yeah, I feel like kicking the next person who reminds us how important this mission is square in the nuts. Let's go. I think we got everything." An overly eager van driver awaited us curbside. As we turned toward the flight line, I saw my 4-engine C-141 a half mile away. Painted in matte gray and peppered with hydraulic stains, she was a stark contrast to the sleek, twin-tailed fighter jets lined up perfectly beyond her. At 325,000 pounds, 168 feet long, and with a 160-foot wingspan, many at Hill Air Force Base viewed her as a utilitarian, ugly duckling. When I looked at my T-tailed, swept-wing, bug-sucking, whistling death from above, framed by Utah's Wasatch Mountains, I saw the prom queen. Before our vehicle came to a stop, a grinning lieutenant colonel hastily strutted over. His flight suit, aviator sunglasses, colorful scarf, and flight cap formed into an exaggerated canoe shape with the aft part pushed down in the classic fighter pilot crush, screamed, "I'm a fighter pilot, and I know I'm dead sexy." "Good morning, Captain McDermott. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Swanson. I'll be the troop commander for the mission." We were supporting the deployment of an F-15 squadron to Morón Air Base, Spain. We do this by trailing well behind the gaggle of fighter aircraft with Lieutenant Colonel Swanson's maintenance troops and equipment. If a plane had a maintenance issue and had to divert, we would head to it so Lieutenant Colonel Swanson's personnel could fix it. If there weren't any F-15 diverts, we'd follow the fighters to Spain. I put on my best customer service smile and said, "Good morning, sir. Is everything all right? Do you have everything you need?" "Thanks. We're good for now. My boys just finished loading the last of our gear, but I will need your help en route for some HF phone patches so I can update our command center of our progress. This is a pretty important mission." Out of the colonel's field of view, Rich locked his stare on me. His tightly sealed lips, squinting eyes, and raised shoulders made it obvious he was holding back a serious case of the giggles. "Oh, thanks, sir. I'm well aware. Please let us know if you or your men need anything." "Roger that." And with that, Lieutenant Colonel Fighter Guy strutted with a sense of urgency toward our plane's large rear clamshell doors. When I got into the cockpit, Rich was already in his seat, engrossed in loading the navigation computer. Matt and Steve, our two engineers, were behind him at the systems panel. Steve was a pleasure, but I really loved flying with Matt. He had only been assigned to the plane a few years, but had sought out and absorbed a lot of valuable corporate knowledge from the older engineers. With his frowned-upon mustache, porous filter, and eagerness to tell it like it is, he wasn't the Air Force's picture of political correctness. I valued Matt's bluntness because many functional planes and good crews have been lost because someone with critical information felt it wasn't their place to speak up. I greeted Matt and Steve. "How's it going, guys?" Matt said, "We're ready to go if you can just keep the lieutenant colonel from crawling up our ass." "Geez, this guy is pinging like a 6-year-old after chugging 3 Mountain Dews." "Yeah, he's pretty motivated. Let me know if he gets in the way again, and I'll use my aircraft commander charm to de-ass him." "Do all our fuel numbers look good to you?" "Yeah, they look good. I've never taken on 80K during an air refueling. Hell, that's gonna be at least 20 minutes hanging on the boom. I guess this is a pretty big mission." Rich's head jerked in my direction. Before we made eye contact, I turned my face aft to avoid his smirking gaze. Rich was in his mid-20s, lean and tall, and always sporting a tight haircut. He moved fast, but his mind moved faster. I was pleased to get him for our mission because he was incredibly skilled, had a great sense of humor, and always had your back. He came to our squadron from initial pilot training in the mid-1990s. At that time, the Air Force was going through a pilot drawdown, and most pilot training graduates went to desk jobs with a promise to get back to the cockpit in a few years. Doing well enough to score a desirable assignment like the C-141 spoke highly of his abilities. After our final checks, paperwork, and briefs, we brought our plane to life. Designed in the early 60s, the C-141 was officially named the Starlifter, but affectionately called the Star Lizard. Crewed by a minimum of 2 pilots, 2 engineers, and 1 loadmaster, it was designed purely for function. The engineer sat sideways behind the 2 pilots and managed the mostly manual 3x4-foot systems panel. The pilot's forward and overhead panels had big analog gauges with no CRTs, and all the knobs and controls seemed oversized by 1990 standards. She was an honest and dependable aircraft. I quickly fell in love with her. Taxiing out, I was gentle with the engines. Our jet wash could send objects flying toward the surrounding fighters, damaging the delicate swans. I also squared my turns to avoid clipping anything with my tail. With our checklist complete, tower cleared us for takeoff. I pulled onto the runway. Holding the brakes, I set takeoff power. 80,000 pounds of thrust pushed against our airframe. The sound was deafening. The plane shook. Brakes released, we started to roll. A lumber at first. As we picked up speed, the engines gulped more air and produced more thrust, a virtuous cycle that helped us accelerate. I steered via my rudder pedals, my left hand on the yoke with my right hand on the throttles, ready to rip them back for a reject. Takeoff is always the most critical phase of flight. If we lost an engine or had another malfunction, I'd have to make a split-second decision whether to stop our heavy aircraft or nurse it airborne. Our data showed we could make it off the runway after an engine failure, but the margins weren't the best. Short runways, high field elevations, high temperatures, and heavy aircraft weights can negatively impact takeoff performance. We had 3 of those variables working against us. Everyone was silent. Matt was looking forward from the engineer's panel and surveying his systems. His keen eye would be the first to spot a problem. Steve, sitting next to him, was backing him up. Rich looked forward and monitored our engine instruments. His hands were close to the throttles and his yoke, ready to assume control. Lieutenant Colonel Fighter Guy in the cargo bay fussed with his scarf. Passing 120 knots, we were committed to takeoff. We'd run off the end of the runway if we tried to stop. If we lost an engine at that speed, we could take off, but we need to accelerate another 20 knots before rotating. At 140 knots, Rich said, "Go." That was my prompt to rotate the aircraft. I pulled the yoke back, the nose slowly rotated, the Star Lizard transitioned from earthbound beast to a machine held aloft by only the low pressure created by its wings. I said, "Positive rate, gear up." Rich replied, "Gear up," and raised the handle. We then retracted our flaps, accelerated, and headed northeast. En route, we managed our speed to ensure we rendezvoused with the KC-135 tanker at our scheduled time, 6 hours after takeoff. 2 hours before our scheduled rendezvous, we made our final speed adjustment and got a radio phone patch to our command center. We needed to confirm our tanker was still on schedule, and we didn't need to divert for any broken F-15s. We learned that all the F-15s, several hundred miles ahead, were in great shape. That negated the need to divert, but meant we had to air refuel to make it to Spain. Nearing the air refueling airspace over the North Atlantic, we accomplished our air refueling checklist, which had us slow, configure the fuel system to accept gas, stow our loose gear, and make sure our passengers and cargo were strapped in. Turbulence, tenseness on the controls, and flying through the tanker's wake would often cause a bumpy ride. We entered the air refueling airspace at 24,000 feet, and the autopilot flew its programmed left-hand racetrack pattern, which had two 50-mile straight legs. Rich called out the common frequency. Reach 421 entering AR-20, 20 miles west of the IP at flight level 240. 3 seconds after that call, our air tanker crew responded. Bangor 315 on AR-20 at flight level 2505 west of the IP. I pushed up the throttles and responded, Roger, Bangor 315, looking for you. I was flying the identical racetrack pattern as Bangor 315, but I was 15 miles behind and 1,000 feet below. As per procedure, we entered at the same speed, so if I accelerated, I'd eventually catch the tanker. The only thing we needed then was to spot the tanker so I could complete the rejoin visually. We entered a 180-degree turn, while Rich, Steve, and I craned our necks at the windscreens to catch sight of the other plane. I also worked the weather radar antenna tilt to get a primary blip on our screen for relative bearing. As we rolled out of our turn, I got Bangor 315 on our radar and announced he should be at 11 o'clock, 30 degrees high and 5 miles. Steve, who was standing behind my seat, shouted, I got him, and pointed to the tanker. I followed his arm, caught sight of the tanker, then transmitted, Reach 421 has Bangor 315 in sight. Bangor 315 responded, Roger, Reach 421 is cleared to pro-contact. I replied, Reach 421 cleared to pre-contact. Bangor 315 had cleared me to maneuver my aircraft to 20 feet below and 50 aft of the boom operator's pod at the tail of his aircraft. Once stabilized there, I'd be cleared into contact position for refueling. My aircraft's nose would be under the tanker's tail cone in this spot. I pushed the throttles up further and manipulated the autopilot to turn and climb toward the target. I kept him painted on our radar screen for distance and bearing, cross-checked that information with the distance shown on one of my forward panel gauges, and monitored my speed to avoid excess closure. As usually happened when we went visual, my adrenaline kicked in. That, plus the 2 cups of coffee to compensate for my abused circadian rhythm, had my heart racing. I tensed. I often joked that if I sat on cold briquettes before an air refueling, I'd be pulling diamonds out of my boxers by the time we were done. With air refueling, even the best can have a bad day, and I never considered myself one of the best. If I couldn't stay connected to the tanker refueling boom long enough, we'd have to divert for gas. And a lot of people with fancy-ass scarves and ginormous watches would be very disappointed. I'd also have to explain to my squadron commander why I blew the mission and live with that stigma for some time. At least 100 people were involved in getting me and this tanker together. Now, none of them could do anything else to help. It was all up to me. I thought, okay, Kevin, you need to relax. If you don't, this is not going to go well. Maneuvering a giant cargo plane 20 feet under a comparably sized tanker aircraft could be a head game. You used a lot of fine motor skills to keep your not-so-nimble C-141 in position, so being relaxed was essential. I tried all the tricks to calm myself. Chewing gum, listening to music, deep breathing, etc. None of those worked. Then, I stumbled on a practice that worked like a charm. Thinking of my family. But it wasn't just thinking of my family in a generic sense. I had a specific memory that always unwound me. That image was of me in my lounge chair with my 2 toddler sons in their fleece-footed zip-up pajamas watching Thunderbirds Are Go, a 1960s sci-fi puppet movie. We're singing A Shooting Star Will Shoot You with Cliff Richard Jr. and the Shadows Band in the movie. My lovely bride sits on a nearby couch. 2 miles from the tanker. I replayed that image in my mind, while everyone on the flight deck was dead quiet, except for an occasional required call-out. I was mentally singing that song with Pete and Tim while Kate rolled her eyes. Kate was the wise and capable lady who married an awkward meathead without 2 dimes to rub together, and the partner who never lost faith in me, even after some biblical blunders. And she was the incredible mother of the kids whose innocence and unconditional love inspired me to be a better man. I couldn't get enough of them, and they couldn't get enough of me. The tension drained. My heart calmed. I accidentally exhaled a small laugh. A concerned Rich asked, Kev, you okay? Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, I just thought of something funny. I clicked off the autopilot and continued the rejoin manually. 100 feet behind, we passed through the tanker's wake turbulence. Since we were aligned with his center line, we didn't get the violent rolling forces normally associated with it. I finally reached pre-contact position and held my plane there for a few seconds. From there, I could clearly see the 40-foot refueling boom and the boom operator laying on his belly in the tanker's tail. He would control 2 small wings on the boom to fly it toward my plane, then extend the telescoping end to latch it in my air refueling receptacle, which was 8 feet behind and 2 feet above my head. Satisfied my plane was stabilized, I transmitted, Reach 421, pre-contact. The tanker crew responded, Reach 421 cleared to contact. They cleared us to 20 feet below and 30 feet aft of the boomer's pod. I added power again. As I inched closer, I saw the 2 strips of colored director lights on the tanker's belly. One strip showed the corrections necessary to get to the vertical center of contact position, and the other showed far and aft. I felt my aircraft slowing. Our plane's air bow wave was hitting the tanker's tail, so I added a half knob width of throttle. With their autopilot off, the tanker pilots could feel that compressed air mass push their tail up, making their nose go down. My head was locked on the tanker at an upward 30-degree angle, and I was moving my huge plane inches at a time. I made small corrections while constantly rocking the yoke side to side and far and aft. Small wrist twists and finger movements of my cupped right hand advanced and retarded the throttle levers a half knob width at a time. Rudder inputs could over-control you, so my feet rested on the floor guarding the pedals. Rich was also staring up at the tanker while regularly monitoring our instruments and giving me information on closure and when to expect another turn. Steve, our third set of eyes, was strapped into the jump seat between us. With the tanker's director lights centered and staying that way, I called Reach 421 contact. The tanker crew replied, Roger, contact. A few seconds later, the boom flew from its stowed position down toward my aircraft. We heard swoosh clunk. as the boom flew over our heads and plugged our air refueling receptacle. Matt said, "We got a good latch." That was confirmed when I saw the green latch light on my forward overhead panel. We were attached to the plane ahead, and it was the job for me, my kids, my lovely bride, and Cliff Richard Jr. and the Shadows to keep my air refueling receptacle within an approximate 10-foot wide, 8-foot tall, and 8-foot long box, the boom's travel limits, for the next 20 minutes. I could disconnect at any time via a button on my number 1 throttle, and the boom operator could do the same. After that, we could always reconnect, but it was best to stay on with the first plug so you wouldn't psych yourself out. The boom operator transmitted on our crew intercom system via a magnetic comm link through the boom. "Good afternoon. Reach 421. I'm showing a good latch. How much will you need today?" I replied, "Good afternoon. We'll need the full 80,000. Are you configured to receive fuel?" "Yes, configured to receive." The jet fuel rushed through the 6-inch diameter pipe above our heads. Matt said, "We're taking on fuel." He then manipulated the fuel panel to make sure it went to the correct tanks to keep our center of gravity in limits. I was making dozens of small corrections per minute to stay in position during our racetrack pattern. Matt gave us an updated of fuel boarded every 10,000 pounds. As our plane took on more fuel, it got heavier and reacted differently. I made pitch trim inputs with my left thumb and continuously walked the throttles and yoke. After 15 minutes, 2 180-degree turns, and 50,000 pounds boarded, I was getting tired, and my eyes were burning on the westbound legs from the setting sun. Channeling my inner Cliff Richard Jr., I stayed in position. A few minutes later, Matt announced, 70,000 unloaded. I thought, not much more now. Then, 22 minutes after we latched, the boom operator announced, "That's 80,000 pounds," and the fuel flow above our heads stopped. Matt said, "Yup, that's 80,000. We're reconfigured and you're cleared to disconnect." I said to the boom operator, "Thanks for the gas. Reach 421 disconnecting." He signed off, "See ya." I hit the AR disconnect button. We were 2 separate planes again. The boom operator flew his boom a safe distance away while I backed up to pre-contact position. Once stabilized in pre-contact, the tanker crew read us our new ATC clearance so we could separate our formation. We thanked the maniacs for their help and headed on our way. With the threat of a mid-air collision behind us and a full belly of fuel, we all declinched. Matt exclaimed, "Damn, 80,000 in one plug? That shit's hot." Rich followed with, "You the man. How the hell did you do that?" I said to Rich, "You've got the aircraft." He replied, "I got the aircraft." With a grin, slid my seat back, exhaled, and said, "Thanks. I just went back to the basics and used what matters most."
That was the aptly named Cliff Richard Jr. and the Shadows Save the Day Again, written by Kevin McDermott, who is joining me from a hotel room in Seattle because, Kevin, you are still a pilot and all over the place, correct?
Correct.
All right. Good pilot answer. 10-4. Kevin, listening to that story, the first thing that jumps out at me, of course, is just how marvelously detailed you made that entire piece, all the imagery. And I just love how I'm in the cockpit with you. Throttle, radio chatter, gauges, your crew, the faith you put in your co-pilot. And it's funny because you love everybody in this story. You, the refueling pilot, you chat with him, your crew, you're tight with everybody. But there's one guy, one class of human that you don't reserve much respect for. And that, of course, is Lieutenant Colonel Fighter Guy, who I would like to note, you said he not only wore a scarf, but he fussed with it. It's just such a demeaning way to put it. And then downrange a bit, you said if you screwed up, a lot of guys with, quote, ginormous stars and fancy ass watches were going to be disappointed. So I'm going to give you your chance here to tell me how much respect and admiration you have for fighter pilots.
Hey, I have a hell of a lot of respect for fighter
I
pilots,
know,
but
but
you give each other crap. And, they give the dog crap hauler, the heavy guys like me, trash too. It's just good natured. These guys are basically gladiators. They got to get in a plane, go out there and kill or be killed, literally. They got to have a lot of bravado.
add a scarf.
And a scarf, and a great scarf, and a ginormous watch.
Yeah.
But, sometimes it plays a little much, so you just got to laugh at it.
Sure. And you put on your best customer service smile. I love that.
Yeah.
The C-141, the Starlifter, the Star Lizard. If I'm not wrong, that is a huge airplane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's comparable in size to a 767. A lot of people have been on the 767, so it's about that size. 325,000 pounds. You load it up, and she's a beaut. 4 engines. Like I said, swept wing, T-tail, bug-sucking, whistling death from above.
You call her honest and dependable.
Yes.
Now, a plane that big, describe liftoff for me. What is it like watching that big guppy get off the earth?
It's great. It's why I love what I do. Like I said, you're transitioning from this earthbound thing, and now all of a sudden you're just floating. Just some magic of physics and low pressure is holding you in the air. And the magic of it is it's just with slight pressures with the control yoke and everything like that. So
the size of this particular airplane, though, you're flying an office building off the ground.
It's half a football field in length.
Yeah.
Some people say you're not flying a plane. It's not a plane. It's a place. It's so big, So it's.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
All right. Cliff Richard Jr. and the Shadows. These come from the Thunderbirds Are Go, which was a claymation kids show, if I recall, in the late 80s, 90s. Cliff Richard was a character on the Thunderbirds, and he would sing a song, and you would have your 2 sons sitting around you on your lap. When you would flick that huge place, that flying place from auto to manual, and it's you, Kevin, it's you. You went right to family. The same way I asked you to describe for me the power of lifting off a plane that big, describe for me, in contrast, this marvelous small moment that you imagined with your family. Why did it have such calm for you?
Because that's the place I want to be. The best place in the world is watching that stupid movie with my kids and giggling away while my wife is rolling her eyes at me. Can't get any better than that. That's what makes me happy. So it drains all the tension out of you, and you can just focus. It's like getting up to the tee. Every golfer knows it. You better relax. That's the way I do it. And I'm sure everybody has their own little happy place they have to go to.
I just love the description in that story because you're describing so many conditions that are shifting every which way, and the importance of being on the right altitude and the right path and the racetrack path and finding the tanker, getting in the exact right position. Because I'm listening to this story, having never been in that seat, but listening to your descriptions, I almost feel like I could fly that plane. Of course I can't. Right up to the point where I heard this line: dozens of small corrections per minute, while you took on 80,000 pounds of fuel, which my math tells me is 40 tons. That changes your aeronautics, that changes the physics, and there you are with your fingertips and your toes and your thumb. Can you just give me 1 minute of those corrections right here? Just imagine taking the fuel and walk me through that.
Yeah, it's as I said in the article, everything's changing. Your weight, so your power's going up, your trim, on the elevator and all that stuff. And the way you do that the best is walking the throttle, constantly going back and forth. You don't just go jab and hold it. You kind of keep on going back and forth, and you kind of even out the motions by making lots of small, constant corrections, as well as with the throttles. You're just walking them a knob width at a time with your fingers. You're not pushing your arm. You're just walking the throttles back and forth. And the biggest thing is to stay loose, and you have to keep the plane in trim with the pitch trim, as I mentioned, so that don't have a death grip. You just have as light a touch as you can on it. Because once you get a death grip, all your movements are exaggerated. So that's how you air refuel, in theory.
Now, I ask all warriors this, that experience sitting in a military plane doing these remarkable things that even your own crew was kind of agog that you did it. Can you, without too much humility, tell me where that is in you today?
Well, first of all, you say warrior. They stress that in the Air Force. You're all warriors. You're all warriors. But in my heart, I was never shot at. Meeting the people in your class, the Mighty Pen Project, that exposed me to some warriors, some true heroes, if you ask me, who had to face a lot. And the reason I was out there was to get those people whatever the heck they needed, because they are heroes and they're at the tip of that spear. But to back up to how I use what I learned in the Air Force and a lot of other things right now, everybody's got that moment where your heart just goes, it's going to jump out of your chest because something's happening. Like, we have a simulator check every 9 months. We have to stay recurrent with training. They put us through the simulator. They blow up engines, do all this other stuff. I was having a real bad experience because it was in Denver. I never sleep in Denver. My gut was bothering me, and I just showed up exhausted. And I'm in the plane. We're going through all these maneuvers. My eyes are burning. And then all of a sudden, I'm drinking too much caffeine, and then the heart starts pounding. And it's like, okay, happy place. Keep it together.
Who are you flying for now?
United Airlines.
Okay. What are you flying?
I'm flying the 737.
All right. How many people?
We range from 120 to 179 because we have 6 different versions of the plane. The 700 is the smallest version with 120, and they progressively stretched it longer. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the MAX, and I fly that also.
Okay. Well, I'm going to speak for all the other people in uniform, the quote warriors who you don't necessarily think you belong amongst. I'll tell you what they would say. That every single man and woman who put on this country's uniform and went to do what Uncle Sam called them to do is a man and woman of honor, deserves the highest honor as a veteran, and belongs 100% in the fraternity of warriors, combatants, and those who serve this country and that flag honorably. I know these men and women, Kevin, and man, they don't parse. You answered the call. You went where you were told, did what you were told to do, and did it well. So
thank you. Thank you.
Last question for you, Kev. Well, I got 2 questions for you. You called that fighter pilot dead sexy. Something you want to get off your chest?
Hey, those are long flights. Just saying.
All right. I feel you. And what goes into a good co-pilot?
On a crew aircraft, obviously, I'm looking for someone who could work. As I mentioned about Matt in this story, someone who could speak up. That's the biggest thing. Speak your mind, because I am human. I am going to make mistakes. And there have been a lot of aircraft lost because someone didn't speak up. And then all of a sudden, things tumbleweeded and it was no good. So I appreciate bluntness. I appreciate confidence, obviously. And I like a good sense of humor. I'm having fun up there. I'm really enjoying myself. Yeah, speaking up, being good at your job. And if you love your job, you know what? You're never going to work. You're just having fun.
30,000 feet and 600 knots is not the place to hold your tongue. If you see something, say something.
Yes.
Kevin, it's always a pleasure to see you. You're a good man, a good writer, and a good friend. On behalf of Warriors, thank you for what you've done for this country. And, hey, man, I can only say fly safe and be well.
Thank you, sir.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It's an honor.